If you like the video, make sure to like, subscribe, and comment. For more videos like this, people share their scariest encounters with cryptids, bipedal and tall pale strange creatures, and crawlers in the forest and woods. For example, skinwalkers, dogman, crawlers, etc. It was mid-January a few years ago in New York. I always loved the winter because of how cold and snowy everything was, but now I can't shake the feeling that there was more than just wood and snow in a wintry forest. My family was upstate for the weekend to have some bonding. I just wanted to explore the forest. I was allowed to go out into the woodland by myself as long as I stuck to the path. I was out there for about 18 minutes before I started noticing something. I looked around curiously to explore the forest's beauty when I noticed a very awkward-looking mound of snow, or at least I thought it was a mound. I looked at it closely, but it was too far into the forest for me to see any real features. I thought nothing of it and decided to go back home. After 2 minutes, I felt I was being watched and kept on looking around me. I convinced myself it was just squirrels, and I kept on retreating. I smelled an awful stench to my left, causing me to jolt to my side, looking for whatever was out there. That same mound was there again, but it looked like something else. It had these twisted bones extending into the skin and had pale white skin. Under instinct alone, I started booking it back to the house. I heard something chase me from the woods. Lucky for me, I had multiple first-place track finishes, and I was running a straight, which in the end allowed me to get back home quickly. I got back into the view of my house and sprinted up to the porch. I looked back into the forest and saw the rustling of leaves coming to the edge. Nothing. It just stopped, and the stench faded away. For some reason, I never told anyone except my 2 best friends, who dismissed it as me ducking with them. I hope I can find more answers for whatever I saw that day. So, I had an encounter a couple weeks ago, and after hours of research, I still have no answers. I was squirrel hunting on my property in southern West Virginia. I was leaning up against an oak tree in somewhat of a clearing. The forest was alive and very active. I then heard a quiet but distinct human whistle. It was quiet, but very close. So close, it sounded as though the tree I was leaning on had whistled at me. Naturally, I checked my surroundings, thinking someone had somehow snuck up on me, but no one was there. The partial clearing I was in had approximately 30 to 50 feet of good visibility, followed by extremely dense undergrowth. After confirming that no one, a human, was near me, I immediately noticed that the forest had gone silent and completely still. I continued to hunt for roughly another hour, but the forest remained still, so I called it a day. This occurred around 6 p.m., and although I've had experiences on other parts of my property, I've never had anything happen in that spot for the 20 years I've hunted it. I've talked to locals and neighbors and researched many hours on the internet and have basically come up empty. Any theories? I live in Kitchener. One of my jobs at the time was as a mobile DJ. I'd run school dances, weddings, reunions, and the like. Most nights, I'd be driving home past midnight. Our warehouse is in Brantford, Ontario, so the commute was about 45 minutes. I'd always taken the same route, but since that winter night, I just don't anymore. I was familiar with the route. It was nice and scenic. Even in the winter, it was beautiful. There's a road called Glen Morris Road, and coming home, I'd turn onto Glen Morris and drive about 2 kilometers before turning off. The road is lined with trees, and then there's a wide open field before a small woodlot or forest. The night was clear, the moon was bright, and you could see this blanket of white all the way to the woodlot. That night, though, I saw something. It was huge, in the middle of the field, and it seemed man-shaped. I think. I didn't get a good look. I just knew there wasn't something like that there when I'd driven to the warehouse. All I remember from seeing it is the size and the shape. And absolute, unreasoning fear. Fear caused me to jam on my gas. I don't even remember making my turn off the road. I was at the stop sign down that next road before the fear just disappeared. I think there are things out there we're not supposed to see. I was not supposed to notice. And I really believe that if I had known I had seen it, I wouldn't be here. Make of it what you will. Hello all. I heard a story from my aunt today mentioning how she saw some type of demon when she was a child while out at a family cabin in the Cape Breton Highlands. The cabin is surrounded by forest and salt water alike, and being in Cape Breton, the area is North American. The experience she described was seeing her mother, my grandmother, standing outside of the cabin window from the outside in the yard. Staring at her as she looked out. It looked just like my grandmother, except for when it smiled, which clearly gave away the human guise as it was too exaggerated and wide for a normal human smile. This terrified my aunt and caused her to simply lay down and be as quiet as possible. She was too afraid to see if her parents and sister were in their beds, The room had 4 bunk beds where the whole family was sleeping. Needless to say, she didn't sleep that night. Nothing more came of the experience, though. This tale was spurred on by her daughter wanting to see the horror movie Smile, and the smiles in the movie trailer reminding my aunt of the creature she claims to have seen in the guise of her mother, my grandmother, that night. My aunt was around 7 or 10 years old when she claims this happened. It was probably around 40 years ago, in the 1980s. My curiosity is about what creatures of myth and folklore, and what have you, does this account line up with? What creatures fit the description of being near salt water or forest highlands, can assume human guise, and have an unnatural smile in said guise? There is no hard evidence other than eyewitness accounts, friends and family. I'm keeping this short, not too descriptive, hopefully just enough. My whole family and friends have seen a tall, solid white humanoid creature that appears in multiple colors, black, gray, etc. This creature watches from afar when spotted and runs or appears out of plain sight. It's not a fan of hiding and stays in plain sight. Now the good part, a log cabin in the woods. Me and 2 of my best friends have all seen it. Only when on the move, we have pretty much pinpointed the position, but it's never there, not too much to describe it with, unfortunately. I'm thinking witchcraft or something else. It doesn't end here, as there have been at least 24 other small anomalies, but these are some of the main ones we need to solve. Please respond with anything you may know. This encounter took place in the winter of 2016 in Davies County, Indiana. It was around 8 o'clock, and it was very dark outside. I was out feeding my goats. The goats' shed was about 300 yards away from my home. To get to the shed, I had to cross 2 small fields and walk along a narrow path through the woods. These woods border an Indiana naval facility. After I had finished, I began to walk back. I had crossed 1 foot and was about halfway through the narrow path when I started to hear rustling in the underbrush. All I had with me was a little flashlight that only shined about 10 feet in front of me. I was almost at the end of the path when I spotted something. It was on all 4s with a bony frame, elongated limbs, and pale skin. While the first part of that description sounds pretty generic, it did seem to have a long and highly flexible neck. Not long after I noticed it, it noticed me and bolted down the path. It ran, almost scuttling into the second field. This field had a small hill in the center. This thing fled and disappeared over one side. I ran as fast as I could around the other side of the small hill and zigzagged back to my house, where I quickly locked all of my doors. This thing was terrifying, but it seemed watchful more than anything, for now. I live in New Jersey. A few weeks ago, we suffered massive flooding and damage due to the residual effects of Hurricane Idaho. This was compounded by a Category 3 tornado that appeared out of nowhere. As a result, many people suffered severe flooding and damage. I too was affected, but not so severely. I often work in the evenings, sometimes until 12 a.m. I have never experienced shadow figures or the like in my home. I made sure that my house was blessed and that all entries and exits were spiritually closed. But, after this flood and tornado, I started seeing a transparent creature pass from my chimney into our guest bedroom. At first, I thought I was tired. I mean, working long hours and cleaning up the damage from the storm was daunting, but it happened every night. I would see this creature making a path from our bathroom, where we have an old chimney structure, to our guest bedroom. One night, it hilariously froze in mid-stride because it knew I could see it from the corner of my eye. Yet, the minute I turned my head, it zoomed away. I thought I was losing my mind. Maybe I was overworked and really needed a much-needed rest. But when my cat started staking out the bathroom and then subsequently watching the chimney, I knew I wasn't crazy. One night, one of my cats even chased it into the bedroom. I haven't seen the creature lately. Perhaps my cat scared it away. I have 5, so it's hard for any spirit to go unnoticed in my house. But I am at a loss as to what kind of cryptid was unleashed by the strange weather we experienced. Whatever it is not local to New Jersey. The creature was brownish in color with a long snout nose, similar to a moose, with small ears. It had a square trunk-like midsection and spindly legs and arms. The legs were long, bent, and disproportionate to the body. The arms were long but appeared to suit the size of the creature. The height was around 3 feet. The creature did not have wings or scaly skin. Any insight you could provide would be appreciated. To start off, this story takes place in Sussex County, Delaware. This morning, I dropped my father off at work. At the time, I thought it was strange that we hadn't seen deer in or around the road because the area surrounding the mill he works at is usually swarming with them, and no hunting is allowed there. There are no large natural predators for them to fear, either. Skipping ahead, after leaving the mill, I dropped my father off. I rode the winding road out, and to my left there is a massive field with 2 grain silos bordering its edge. On the left side of most sides of the silo, there was a creature about 50 yards out in the field. It was the size of a large dog. Its head had no visible ears and no tail. I couldn't make out any eyes or facial features. It had a relatively short muzzle. Its rear legs were longer than its front legs, making it almost slant downward. It was black and seemingly non-reflective, almost giving me the feeling as though I was staring into a creature-shaped void. It was trotting along the field, but the way it moved was all wrong. It stepped first with its rear legs, and then the front and rear legs sort of flexed as if they were wet noodles, which made me think it was an injured dog at first, but it moved very quickly. I only saw the creature for 20 seconds or so, but I'm still shaken up. It's all I can think of, and I feel very unsettled and disturbed. What could this be? About 4 to 5 years ago, I had an encounter with something that inspired my creations. It was late at night, around 8 to 9 p.m. I was out on a walk to a nearby church. I live in a very rural area of Georgia. When I got up to the church, I decided to sit down on some of the stairs that lead to one of the main entrances. It was dead silent, there was not a sound nearby. I looked over towards the graveyard when I saw something. It was behind a small, thin tree. It stood probably around 7.5 feet. It was dark at the church, with the only light originating from a tall light post about 50 feet away. The cryptid was pitch black, to the point where it stood out against the darkness. It looked humanoid in appearance but had no visible features. You could see half of the body sticking out from behind the tree. The weird thing is, the rest of its body seemed to disappear behind it, not appearing on the other side of the 4-inch diameter tree, as if it were a manifestation of the shadow itself. I freaked out and did a double take, but by the time I looked back, it was gone. I fled. My home was in the direction of the light post. When I turned around and fled, I saw the creature behind the lamppost. This was terrifying to me. The fact that it seemed to have phased from one shadow to the next was quite freaky. I ran as fast as I could towards the nearest house. As I live in a small neighborhood, I know pretty much all my neighbors. I called my uncle and told him about what happened. He said I was probably so tired that I imagined it. But I know what I saw. It wasn't some shadow person like a ghost or spirit, it was physical, not spiritual. Since this encounter, I have always felt as if someone is watching me whenever I pass by the shadows of the church. After that, I bought a 2,500 lumen flashlight, and I never went back there without it. I live in the Sierra Nevada mountain range, think of Lake Tahoe. I'm young, and I've already had experiences with what I think are Wendigos or skinwalkers. My backyard leads directly into thick pine woods. At night, you can't see 20 feet ahead of you because of the foliage and high treetops that block any light. Even during the day, the woods turn very dark. I had taken my friends into these woods for a little camping trip. I know a lot about cryptids. Last year, I did a Vendiga cosplay thing, and it turned out well. So on the camping trip, I had the basics. If we needed anything, it's a 10-minute walk back to my house. At about 12, we heard twigs snapping in the woods, and we wrote it off as animals. As we fell asleep, I heard my friend G, sleeping next to me from about 10 feet away, say, "Come here, look at this." But it didn't sound like her, it was more raspy, and the shadows didn't match up. I saw a long, slender face protrude from the tree line and catch the firelight. I saw it and looked, but it backed up before we could all see it. I got up and went to the tree line, and as soon as I did, I heard a deep guttural scream, and I ran. We all did, left everything, and ran. I was ahead of the rest, but I ran, and I've experienced the same thing 2 other times with the same thing. About 5 years ago, me and my older sister went to a nature park, a wetlands, so to speak. Of course we went at night so we could skateboard around because you aren't allowed to. But, you know, a 14-year-old girl is trying to look cool in front of her 24-year-old sister. Well, we went just around as the sun was setting. For a little bit, we got lost since the park was so huge and condensed with thick woods. We were trying to find the bridge, a 20-foot or so bridge, so we could hang out just above the rushing river. By the time we got there, the sun was hardly visible over the mountains. I looked around after drinking my water, and here is where the creepy stuff happened. As I looked at the other side of the bridge, I saw a tall, skinny figure. I first shrugged it off like it was a person, maybe a ranger of the park. But then it got on all fours and walked away. I didn't say anything at first, mainly because I thought it was maybe a bear. I looked back at my sister as we chatted about boys and many other things. Then I looked back at the end of the bridge. My sister did too, and we both saw the figure this time. At this point, I was totally freaked out. Mind you, it's still not dark out, the sky was purple and orange, so it wasn't like we were seeing things like when your mind pictures figures in the dark. No. It was right there and getting closer. I told my sister to get the hell out of there. Her going first off the bride and down the hill. I went second, and as I turned to look at the bridge again, it was 5 feet in front of me on all fours once again. It stood there as me and my sister skated off, and this isn't even the end. I told my sister to head to the main building since there are cameras and lots of light. We skateboarded for what seemed like hours, every minute seemed to last an eternity. As we finally got to the main building, we finally stopped ridding our boards. Out of breath and scared, we both looked around. By this time, it was pitch black outside. We made a mad dash to the car, taking a path we had never seen before, but it was outside the park, which made us feel safer. After we got to my sister's Jeep, we both got in, hearts racing and scared out of our minds. And when we tried to leave, the gate was locked. Meaning we couldn't leave since there was only one way in and out of the park. We got even more scared. We tried everything to get out. We even thought about just leaving the car behind and walking the 2 hours home. But we drove onto the sidewalk and got out of the park. To this day, I won't go back to those wetlands ever again. Even in daylight. Whatever that thing was, I never want to see it again. I can't stop thinking about it. And I'm almost 19. You can think this is just a story, but it really did happen. Me and my sister don't even talk about it to this day. Something changed between us, I could feel it after that day. So, I live in central Kansas, not too far off a reservation on a farm that was established roughly around 1858 or so. I just moved out here about 2 weeks ago, and there has been something stalking the farm. At first, I thought it was coyotes or even feral dogs and took appropriate measures. Yes, we have livestock guardian dogs, and they do their job. But tonight, both my boyfriend and I saw something that really doesn't fit any local wildlife. The first time I saw it was around 9 p.m., and it was about 25 to 40 feet away with grayish fur, but it covered somewhere around half an acre to an acre in a matter of moments. Like bring a BB gun up to bear, mind you, I thought it was a coyote and just wanted to scare it off from my chickens, not trying to injure it, and it was big, very, very big. By the time it got to the tree line and looked back at me, forward-facing eyes, it was every bit of 7 to 10 feet tall. About an hour and a half later, my boyfriend and I were back outside, and we both saw it at that point, much closer, just across the road. Maybe 75 feet away? And it was every bit of the same, 7 to 10 feet tall, with a bipedal gate snapping full-size tree branches. If you've ever heard a tree branch break, you know what I'm talking about. And it went from being dog level to the ground to being taller than us from that far away while standing in a creek bed. So my friends live in the deep woods of North Carolina. The land they live on has always felt very off. You do not want to be on that property by yourself. It doesn't matter if it's day or night. Me and multiple people have seen this same creature. It is tall, skinny, pale in color, and has white antlers. It hides behind trees and seems to blend in with the tree line. When we see it, it is always at night. It also makes you feel dread when you see it. In the woods around this house, it is almost like everything is either dead silent or making too many sounds at once, like rustling in the trees, leaves being stepped on, etc. Out of all of the times we have seen this creature, we can only compare it to a mix of a hide behind and a Wendigo. The other thing is that we feel that whatever this creature is, it is influencing us from inside the house as well. The front door they have has a glass window in the middle of it, which is opaque. You can't see through it perfectly, but you can tell if someone or something is outside. Anyways, we have all been too scared to open the door when this happens, but sometimes in the middle of the night, we can see something white moving quickly in front of the front door from inside. We also hear footsteps on the other side of the house, among other issues. I'm wondering if this is from this same creature influencing the inside of the house. Anyway, this thing is really freaking us out, but when we try looking up things like this, we cannot find anything similar at all. I live in a country neighborhood surrounded by woods and pastures in northeast Texas, bordering Louisiana. Last night I went out to my car around 10 p.m., and I heard a noise from the trees and bushes no more than 15 yards from me. I looked quickly, expecting to see a deer, but instead saw a graceful bipedal figure bounding across the street into the other yard, vanishing into the darkness of the night. I quickly got in my car, turned my lights on, and faced my car in the direction it ran. I didn't see anything, but when I turned my car toward the dead-end road across from where it ran, I saw the silhouette of a large, four-legged creature with glowing eyes. At first, I thought it was a dog, but it would have had to be a Great Dane or larger. It looked at me for a split second before running behind the trees and back toward a large pasture. Going back to the bipedal runner. We have a big orange street light covering most of that road, so it's very visible, but this thing wasn't very distinguishable aside from his humanoid form. It bounded with a graceful stride like a deer. It sent a chill up my spine. I had never seen anything like it before. Does any of this check out with y'all? I know skinwalkers are known to be a southwestern thing, but I have looked up reports of Texas sightings. We were outside. I live backed up to a forest. It's dark enough to need street lights, and the forest and field are at the end of the street where there's no light. My daughter made a loud, shrill noise. Something made a weird noise. The kids wouldn't be quiet, so I could hear it, but I swear it sounded behind my house. Kids minutes later decided to go play tag in the field or at the edge of the forest while we sat at the edge of the yard. I can still hear them, but not see them. Not even 5 minutes later, they come running, crying, saying they saw taller than the trail sign, 7 feet by 8 feet. It's all white, including its head, but its legs weren't as long as its torso. No hair. On 2 legs. Glowing eyes never left the edge of the forest. They said they saw the eyes first, and by the time I got the flashlight and got back over there, they swore it walked into the forest on the other side. My daughter swears it was just watching them when they locked eyes. Northwest Kentucky. This goes hand in hand with my sister stating she saw something similar. 3 a.m., April 2023. Let the dogs out. He heard the crunching of forest material, and the dog went off, turned on his cell phone flashlight, and saw a white, tall, ghouly-looking creature in the tree. Black eyes tall. Can you tell me if this is it? What are we seeing? It never wants to interact, it just watches and runs if we typically shine lights. What does it sound like if it's a crawler? I am 14, male, and live in Scotland with Native American and Mexican ancestry. I am aware that cranes are not sighted in Scotland, but possibly my ancestry could point to something. I was walking at night with my friends, a normal occurrence for us as we live near a small park connected to a forested area. At night, the forested area gets so dark that you need a flashlight to walk through it. Me and 2 other friends were going up a large hill that connects into a field leading to the forest when I heard a twig snap. Turning to my good friend, whom I will refer to as M for this story, I asked him. The duck was that? He shrugged, and my other friend, whom I will call E, added. I didn't hear anything. Now something you should know is that I have a rare hearing disorder called hyperacusis, which means I have a hypersensitivity to any form of sound, so I passed it off as a fox or similar animal. Our flashlight was dim compared to the dark night, and we could only see a few feet in front of us when I saw something in the forest. It was simply a white blur in my vision, but it really freaked me out. I turned to E to see if she was alright, as she is a very anxious person, and she seemed like she saw it too. Not wanting to speak loudly in case it was something dangerous, I stayed silent and continued walking when I suddenly got a strong urge to walk into the woods. It was not a normal urge, but a burning desire to enter the forest in the direction that blurry figure went. As we are underage, we had no easy way to exit the area, so I quietly suggested that it was getting cold and we should leave, not wanting to make it apparent we knew that figure was in the forest with us. We all agreed, and as we turned to leave, I could swear I saw a humanoid figure watching us from the bushes. That's when we all heard it. It sounded like a muffled voice crying. Like an adult man, he was sobbing from right behind us. I got another sudden urge to interact, but since I have half-decent survival instincts, I decided against it. We soon exited the well-lit town and walked back to our own homes, but I couldn't shake the undeniable feeling I was being watched for the whole night. What was that? Me and my buddies were about 15 to 16 years old and used to go smoke in the woods because it was the only place we wouldn't get caught by parents. We had this one favorite spot right on the edge of the woods, behind some cedar trees and a randomly placed chain link fence. It was probably 10 p.m., and we were all walking to the spot to have our ritual late-night smoke when we saw what we thought was a white cat. It was the tall grass directly in front of the entrance of the opening that led to our spot. We kept approaching, thinking once it noticed us, it would just run away, but as we got closer, it started to become clear that this wasn't a cat, and when we were about 15 feet away, it stood straight on 2 legs, had the same stature as a little human, and even sprinted upright into the opening of the woods just like a person would, but it was white, so I'm assuming it was its fur or hair. Once it did that, me and my buddies hauled asses back to the house and yelled, "What the FCK was that thing?" Well, the next day during daylight, we decided to go to the spot to have a morning smoke, and the random fence that's in the woods had chunks of orange fur and bloody flesh stuck to it like something had been mauled or ripped apart back there. We always made jokes afterwards, referred to it as the skunk ape, and always talked about it every time we hung out, up until the day both of the 2 friends that were with me passed away sadly. To start off, I live on the east coast of central Virginia, and the property I live on contains 10 acres of fields and woods. Just as some background information suggests, the property was once a battleground during the Civil War. The Battle of Matataquin took place right around where I live. My friends and I have always seen ghosts and paranormal activity around the property whenever we hang out or camp. I should probably mention that our campsite contains tarp roofs with pallets set up as walls. I should also mention that we always carry firearms with us in the woods, but I'm always enforceful about making sure nobody has any bullets chambered in their weapons unless they have a reason to shoot. One night in late April, 3 friends and I were hanging out by the fire within our campsite. At about 11:30 p.m., one of my buddies and I wandered down the trail with no flashlights of any sort in the dark. We stopped at an opening in the field where we could see the stars. We chatted about random topics for about 5 to 10 minutes until we started hearing steps and twigs snapping in multiple areas in front of us. We are skeptical, but keep an ear out. All of a sudden, I yell "oh shit" and uncharacteristically rack a bullet in the camber of my rifle as quick as I can, then I immediately aim my rifle towards what I'm seeing. It was dark, so I couldn't distinguish details, but this is what I saw. It was a pale silhouette. It was crawling uphill from another trail. It didn't seem intimidating, but rather intently curious. Its body moved similar to how a chicken bobs its head, but more subtle. My friend and I yelled for our other 2 friends to come assist us, and as the creature got closer, we yelled louder. We weren't terrified, we were simply frightened and in awe. The creature went behind a tree and repeatedly poked its head out and back behind the tree. It occasionally began to crawl towards us from behind the tree, but would retreat once again. All its movements were slow and agile. After about 2 minutes, it disappeared, as in we couldn't see it because of the brush, but it probably fled into the woods. Our other 2 friends arrived a minute or so after the creature had fled. Their excuse was that they thought we had run into a hunter or somebody, so they decided to take the bullets out of their weapons. Anyway, the next day, we went back to the spot of the sighting. We found disturbed leaves and tracks exactly where we saw the creature. The friend I was with during the sighting is a skilled hunter and tracker. We followed tracks that led off the property until it seemed to either go cold or we lost them. We did find a small goat skull in the woods with no carcass to follow near the sighting area. Does anyone know what this could possibly be? The closest thing it resembles that I can think of is the rake creature. This was in July. I can't remember what day it was, but it was in July 2019. I used to live in California. I was outside skating and heard noises coming from the back of my shed. I checked to see what it was. The first thing that came to mind was the neighbor cats, but it wasn't that. It was a tall, skinny, pale-looking thing. It looked human, but it was pale, it had no private parts, was completely naked, and was nothing, just flat and pale with no hair. It looked at me, and I just kept looking at it. It was either eating something or looking down at something. None of my pets were outside, they're all indoor animals, and my backyard is pretty big. It looked at me with gray eyes and had arms like a T-Rex. I was super freaked out and didn't yell at all. I just quickly sprinted back to my house and looked at the door. I told my older brother what I saw and said I was just tired. I wasn't at all tired. It was 11 p.m., and I'm never tired. I also have good health, and I don't think I was just hallucinating. I also don't think it was just a tree since there was pretty good light to see what the creature was. I also have nothing for it to be standing on to make it appear tall, so it has to be either a rake or a skinwalker. My daughter, who was 11 years old at the time, was visiting my parents for the weekend during the summer. They own 55 acres in the woods in northern Michigan. Most of the property near the home is cleared, roughly about 7 acres. The rest has sporadic trees here and there until you get to the back 8 acres. Before it gets dark, they like to sit out on their screened-in porch and watch the deer come out to eat, which was done this night. The plan was to wait till the sun went down so she could practice riding her CT200 Coleman bike. It is a small bike that only went 20 miles per hour, and it had a decent headlight on it, so it was good for the cleared trails on the property. While she and my dad were sitting on the porch, just before sunset, my daughter was watching the open field for deer, but instead, she saw something that looked like a white dog moving very slowly. It was roughly 200 yards away from them, and she said, "Grandpa, what is that?" He looked, and he was very confused. My dad is a man who has grown up in the woods. He knows every animal and everything possible about where they live. He told her it looked like it could have been a white coyote. It had a similar size, but it didn't look like any coyote he had seen. The body of the creature was very thin, almost bone skinny, and didn't have a tail. He went and quickly grabbed the binoculars from inside the house. He looked and said, "It looks really deformed, like a deformed pit bull. It's facing away, so I can't really see its face." It left their view, and they continued sitting there, waiting for dark. When the sun set, my dad made sure to tell her not to go fast because riding at night was something new. He knew that she knew the lay of the land well but was worried since it was her first time doing laps at night. When he was done with his safety brief, she took off. As she was riding her way around the property, she had a weird feeling of being watched, but she pushed those thoughts to the side because she assumed it was nerves on top of it being dark in the woods. As she rounded the corner to the straightaway with her light shining down the path, the light from her bike reflected back into her two eyes. She slowed her bike down, thinking it was a coyote or a deer. As she came slowly closer, she realized it was white. She was frozen in a panic when she realized that this was the creature she and my dad had seen in the field. Only this time, she was just feet away. The creature was facing her, and she was able to clearly see its head this time. It was crouching with its long, skinny arms hanging down against its side. It had the head of a human dying of malnutrition. It had a huge chest, and its ribcage was very prominent. What she thought was white fur was skin. It had white skin with gray undertones. It looked like death. Its eyes were half the size of its head and completely reflected the light from her bike. She was still riding towards it, unable to react due to being frozen in fear. The creature's mouth then became clear. It was really big and unnatural. As she got closer, she started to realize that this creature was very tall, like my dad, who is 6 feet 3 inches. She said the long, skinny arms that hung down to its sides had human-like hands. She started to feel sick and woozy. Then she snapped out of it, turned the bike around, and headed back to the house as fast as the bike went. I encountered something like a crawler many years ago. The time was in the mid-80s. The location was on an island in Greer's Ferry Lake, Arkansas, called Sugar Loaf. It's a hilltop that sticks up out of the lake. There's a trail that you can follow up the south side of the hill to the top. I was with a girlfriend. I had a boat, and we had gone to the island to climb up and see the scenic view. We climbed to the top, looked around, and started down. It was sunset, but not dark. Visibility was good. As we walked down the trail, we began to hear something pacing us through the woods. It sounded like it was 100 to 150 feet off the trail, and it sounded like someone walking through dead leaves and brush. We couldn't see what it was, but we could tell by the sound pretty much where it had to be. I didn't think much of it until we stopped for a second and noticed that it had stopped. When we started walking again, we heard it moving again. So it felt like we were being stalked. We tested it a few times by stopping, then starting. It matched our movements every time. So, in my mind, I felt like it was probably someone hiking or camping on the island and trying to have fun with us. After descending most of the way down to the shore, I was getting kind of pissed off about it because it had started to feel very creepy. I told my friend that I was going to try to see who it was and started off the path toward where the noise had been coming from. I noticed that, for the first time since hearing it, it was no longer matching my movements. I couldn't hear any movement but my own. I walked about 100 feet off the path, and I felt like I was probably close to where I had last heard the movement. This was in pretty thick woods. I stopped and looked around, not seeing anything. Then, about 30 feet from me, I saw a figure run from behind a tree. It looked about 7 feet tall. It was an extremely thin humanoid shape. I would call it almost skeletal. Think of a very tall, long-limbed skeleton wrapped in very white skin, and that's a pretty good description. It was running away from me, and I did not see its face. No clothes, just very white skin. It was moving incredibly fast and disappeared into the woods in seconds. It was running upright. No crawling was observed. I was stunned at the sight of it. I remember thinking, that can't be right, over and over. It was just very, very unnatural. I wanted to run, but I could not even lift my legs to turn around. I was physically unable to take a step for 30 seconds or so. Paralyzed with fear or shock, I guess. Finally, I was able to start back on the path and rejoin my friend. We got down the path to the boat and got out of there. And that's it. There's not much more to tell. It is the strangest thing that I've ever experienced. I've told friends about this incident, but I quit doing that long ago because no one believes it. I can't say that I blame them. If someone told me this story and I had not experienced it, I would have trouble believing it as well. This happened to me a couple of years ago at a sleepaway camp, and it still sends shivers down my spine. I've always had a passion for the supernatural and the idea of cryptids roaming the forests, but I've always kept my guard up since this encounter. So to set the scene, 3 years ago I was on a winter camping retreat with my church called Ice Camp, and we traveled to a place called Camp Missiondo located outside of the town of Hillsdale, Michigan. The first night was pretty uneventful, but we got to explore the campgrounds at night as well as get settled into our cabins. However, all the joy was taken away when we were told never to explore the campgrounds alone at night or the monsters would get you. For a bunch of rowdy teenage boys, we just laughed it off and went to bed. The morning was uneventful, but one detail about where my cabin was that it was across a large lake with a relatively small footbridge connecting our cabin with the main lodge and all of the other cabins. So in the main dining hall, one of the cabins mentioned how last night, none of them got to sleep because something was howling in the woods near a section called the Western Town, and my cabin didn't believe them for 1 second, and we just told them that it was coyotes, or wolves, since there have been gray wolf sightings near our camp. However, the teens were telling us this was shaken up, and they were adamant that it was something else, and we joked that it was Bigfoot. So they just told my cabin to shut the F up, and we did. As the day progressed, my cabin and counselor did activities to keep us interested. However, that evening would be the worst night of our lives. It was around midnight, and we set up a bonfire to sit around and reflect on the sermon that was given. Shortly after that, we just began to talk about random stuff. When we heard a bunch of coyotes, we thought nothing of it, but then it just went dead quiet in the span of maybe a couple of minutes. Then we heard one of the most guttural howls that sounded like a human being murdered mixed with a wolf howl. This made us all jump up, but we wanted answers to what we heard, so my counselor, myself, and 2 other cabin mates entered the woods with a 200 lumen flashlight, so we had good visibility, and at first, we didn't find anything. Then, way off into the distance, the furthest area the flashlight could reach, we saw 2 pairs of red glowing eyes looking at us, and as it got closer, we thought we saw wolves, but the movements were unnatural. It was more like a person down on all fours. My counselor told us to move away slowly, but the creature kept approaching, and before I can remember, the second one stood up and began to charge us, and we ran as fast as we could. We yelled to our cabin mates to get their butts to the cabin, and of course, they were confused as to why we were running until they heard the same howl as earlier, and we hauled asses from the bonfire across the footbridge, but we stopped halfway because we thought it wouldn't go any closer. Until we heard the wood creaking rapidly, and my entire cabin booked it once again, this time up to my cabin, and we bolted the door shut. Whatever had followed us was now circling the cabin. All of us were freaking out, but then the thing looked into the window, and I got a good look at what it was. It had a humanoid-built body, muscular yet lanky at the same time, and the head wasn't like that of a Sasquatch, it was like that of a wolf. All night, we heard scathing and heavy footsteps. Until early morning, it lost interest and left. I went to get some breakfast early that morning, and to my horror, I found a large set of claw marks in the wood and a large set of footprints leading towards the woods. So after that harrowing encounter, I found out that the thing we saw was not Bigfoot, but rather an older cryptid from Michigan folklore called the Michigan Dog Man. Ever since then, I have refused to go to a sleepaway camp because, whatever I saw, I knew it would still be roaming the campgrounds. My favorite is sort of a cryptid story. I was part of a land management team that kept finding panther tracks in a remote area of Florida. It was not completely impossible because it was not far from a known Florida panther range, but then we had some visual sightings, cubs, and year-round tracks, which prompted numerous denials on the part of state and federal wildlife agencies. Then we got trail cam photos, and they classified the animal as a non-viable hybrid. Ultimately, we got multiple casts and good photos, and it was finally established that yes, a reproducing Florida panther had set up temporary residence in that area. It's not a huge deal, except that it opened my eyes to how insistent and purposefully ignorant government wildlife officials can be when confronted with information about protected species that doesn't exactly fit into their hard-won, heavily political recovery plans and critical habitat. The long-term implications of having the area where we discovered a reproducing Florida panther reclassified as critical habitat, which never happened, BTW, would have included land development restrictions to the tune of potentially billions lost by a land development group that included the governor at the time. My coworker who deployed the cameras was nearly fired because she had done it without proper authorization, although we used trail cams all the time for all sorts of reasons without asking. It was pretty disgusting overall. My second favorite involves a nighttime sighting of an unknown bipedal, hairy ape-looking thing. I don't call it Bigfoot because, well, that carries a lot of unwanted or undefined implications when a scientist says it. But if there were actual Bigfoots, it was probably one of them. I was driving along a gravel back road in WV prior to the construction of I-77 in the southern half of the state. This particular road eventually dead ends for all practical traffic purposes, but it actually just terminated, at the time. Now there are a few houses and fences, at an old log landing site, from which various trails diverge to the south and west, generally downhill from the large plateau that Beckley sits on. At the time, the nearest houses were about 9 miles to the east, where this road connects with US 19, or about 6 miles as the crow flies. To the west, there were about 20 miles of mostly uninterrupted forest, with only a few very rough 4WD drive trails in between. It was just after dusk and snowing that I was heading east from the dead end area during a brief visit to the general area, where I had been scouting for a potential place to do some black powder rifle hunting. That is a limited, late winter season for hunting whitetail deer with primitive rifles, a nice excuse to spend time alone in the woods when it is blue cold and few others venture out. So as I rounded a small bend in the road, my headlights swept across the road and illuminated this thing just casually strolling across. I was already creeping slowly because of the snow cover. The entire encounter lasted maybe 6 or 7 seconds. It slowed in the middle of the gravel road, looked towards my car, which was about 50 or 60 feet away, and then slowly strolled on into the dark woods. It was so unexpected that I drove on, trying to figure out a way to explain it to myself. I tried to remember some visual or detail that would confirm my identification as a bear, a human, or something that made sense. About a half-mile down the road, it dawned on me that I had seen one of the strangest things I would ever see, and I turned around and went back to the area. This was during the early days of flip phones, and I had no flashlight or cell coverage there. I stopped with my lights shining into the same section of road for a while to see if anything showed itself. Then I got out with my flip phone and searched for tracks. I saw general track shapes, but it was too dark to see any detail or get a photo. I left, and it snowed all night, and when I went back the next morning, there was absolutely no sign. I've been back to the same place dozens of times since then. I haven't seen it or anything like it since. It really bugs me. The Silver Man/Quickfoot Cryptid. One night in 1988, David Coleman, his wife, and 2 children spotted a strange figure running very quickly along the road they were driving down. The figure was huge, at least 7 feet tall, and seemed to be racing along this road at least 70 miles per hour. The forest road was to the southeast of Cairnpapple Hill, where lies an ancient cairn. Neolithic rituals were carried out there, and evidence of burials has been found, some thought to be early Christian, others perhaps earlier, buried with items like a club and a mask. Some claim that this may have been a druidic sanctuary of some kind. Anyway, the road went along from there, parallel to Ravencraig Wood, and along it ran the strange figure. As David was driving, he and his family saw this figure running. It was very tall, very fast, glowing, and the weirdest of all. As it ran in the opposite direction from the car, it had its head turned back towards us and appeared to be scowling, he said. His children and wife saw it too, and they christened it the Silver Man, though he says it wasn't silver. It was more like the figure of someone in a negative, a sort of blank whiteout. Having spoken to David at length, I do not think he is making the event up. When I said I wanted to go up to the site and see if I could get a picture of the creature, he looked really frightened and told me not to do it in case the creature caught me. Yes, he thinks that it, or its descendants, are still up there. His face alone convinced me that he saw something that impacted him greatly. But what can it be? A cryptid, some interdimensional traveler, a trick of the light? About 13 years ago, I was around 16 years old, hanging out with a friend of mine. We're at his parents' house, way out in the sticks on dirt roads, a few miles from an already small town of under 300 people, in between Houston and Austin, Texas. We were sitting in his dad's van, listening to music and prank calling girls from our school, as it got late into the night. We had driven the van to the tree line to distance ourselves from the house, so we could have the music louder without upsetting his older sister. We're facing the trees with the headlights on for hours into the night, about 20 to 30 feet from the tree line. We suddenly realize that all the dogs are barking like crazy in front of us, and we look up at the commotion. Their 3 large dogs are all right in front of the van, facing this creature that is sticking halfway out of the thick brush. It's hard to describe, but the best I can do is say that it looked like a mix of a bunch of different animals. Kind of like a mix between a bear, dog, pig, and deer, but with emphasis on it being big. It seemed to only walk on all 4 limbs, not humanoid. What I remember the most is just being terrified and shocked at how obvious it was that it was not normal, like your brain's trying to match it to something that makes sense but nothing matches. I think it had hooves, some kind of antlers, and hairless, dark gray skin. It was about 3 to 4 times the size of these full-sized pit bulls, who all had the hair raised on their backs, barking ferociously and defensively. These dogs attack anything like cows, hogs, or coyotes but wouldn't get close to this thing. The thing just stood there, like a breathing statue, and its eyes reflected the headlights brightly, seemingly just staring at us. After a few seconds of us staring at it, we looked at each other's terrified faces, and my friend slammed the van in reverse. We both looked behind us as we panic and backed the van towards the house. We scraped to a stop and immediately both looked back to the tree line. The creature is gone, but the dogs are still barking like mad, slightly scattered along the tree line now. My friend and I both start freaking out at each other, like, where the duck is it? Where the duck is it? I was just absolutely panicking. We finally calmed down a little and decide to back the van all the way up to the back porch stoop/door. It's a trailer house. We spent a few minutes at the back doors of the van, arguing about who makes the run to the door first because we both think that whatever it was is waiting just outside. My friend suddenly just opened the door and bolted out, and so my fight or flight kicked in, and I just hauled it after him, not wanting to be left alone with it. That was the first and last time we ever saw or heard of it. Shortly after, his parents got home to see the van still on, lights on, doors open, and oddly backed up to their house door. They had to move the van to be able to get inside the house. We would not go back outside, and they didn't care how crazy they thought we sounded. Over the years, we've both told many friends about this, and most of them believe us, especially now that we're older and not as close as we used to be, but we both still corroborate the same things to this day. We started to wonder if it was the Jersey Devil. I didn't see any wings, but the hooves and antlers seemed to fit, and there have been alleged sightings reported as far as East Texas. Maybe the wings were just folded in such a way? Also, only the front half of its body was protruding from the thick brush. I honestly doubt it was the Jersey Devil, or if that's even real, but I still consider the possibility. I don't know about fitting it to any known cryptid, but what I do know is that we saw some nightmarish creature that, to my knowledge, doesn't and shouldn't exist. The details are difficult to recall because it was so unlike anything normal, but the only thing I can say for sure is that it at least looked like a mix between a bear, hog, and dog, but with hairless dark skin and just an overall unsettling/unnatural look to it. I want to say something like it looked partially decayed, but only because of a lack of better words. It was terrifying. My friend actually recalls it as being bigger than I do. He says it is closer to the size of a horse but shorter and stockier, like a bear or pig. I don't think it was that big, but I can't say for sure. The entire sighting lasted all of about 4 fear-induced seconds, now over a decade ago. To this day, I'm so glad that this old friend still backs me up on that. I was in my teens. It was a hot summer night. I woke up and took a shower. I was definitely awake and going back to bed. Probably 3 a.m. Anyway, the front door of the house opened somehow. It was locked. I heard a strange hum of footsteps up the stairwell. Soon enough, I saw it. A small black creature with glowing blue eyes. I was absolutely terrified. Couldn't move. But I was almost entranced. I had to watch it. It kept slowly coming up the stairs. Probably 3 feet tall. Very dark black with indigo glowing eyes. Humming. It reached the top of the staircase. Then I proceeded into either my parents' or my sister's room. I stayed up in fear for quite a while. Looking back, I think it went into my parents' room, and my mom's personality has changed since that happened. For the worse. She's better now, I think, but it had a long-term negative impact. Maybe even on my dad. Any thoughts on what this thing was? My research has returned nothing. Firstly, the canine-like chupacabras seen in the Americas are just that, canines, in some cases, raccoons, that are infected with mange. Now that I think about it, I'm not sure how in hell we go from a reptilian humanoid with porcupine quills on its back to a disease-ridden dog. Instead, we'll be talking about the Puerto Rican one, as that's the bizarre and original one. Surprisingly enough, the chupacabra encounters date back as early as 1975, when there were a series of attacks in Mocha, Puerto Rico, attributed to El Vampiro de Mocha, aka the Vampire of Mocha. Lo and behold, the animals that were attacked suffered from a loss of blood, and they had a series of small circular holes, but we will be talking about the more famous encounters. The year was 1995. It was a warm March night in Orocorvis, central Puerto Rico. A farmer and his wife noticed the goats traipsing and running around out in the fields, even though they were supposed to be sleeping in their sheds. Both chose to go out and investigate, only to find 8 of their goats killed, all with the signature 3 holes in their necks and abdomens, and the rest of the goats panicking and huddling up. Now the farmer found this weird because, firstly, the killings would have had to have been quick for 8 goats to get taken out within just 1 to 2 hours of the sun going down, and secondly, goats by nature aren't very timid as they are more reactive and willing to throw down with aggressors than say sheep. They also aren't very quiet, meaning for this to have happened under both their noses, the goats were either killed before they had time to react or all of them would have had to be mute and did nothing during the attack. A similar thing would happen in Canavanas, in which 150 animals were killed in the last few days, all with the same 3 puncture wounds to the neck and chest. In fact, it is in Canavanas that the first sightings would occur, with people catching glimpses of a kangaroo-sized, bipedal humanoid with quills on its back and large red eyes running around the hills and leaping from high places. Both the livestock killings and sightings would get so frequent and rack up so much attention that even the mayor at the time, Jose Quimo Soto, hunted for the creature with over 100 personnel at his side. The majority consisted of ex-military and police. Though this was unsuccessful, the hunt managed to get so much attention that it was brought to the headlines in Puerto Rico and even made it to the USA in November of 1995. A comedian and entrepreneur named Silverio Perez, on a video broadcast, named the unknown creature El Chupacabra, which means goat sucker. The sightings continued as, in the city of Caguas, a lady heard something causing a ruckus coming from her son's room, which was odd as he wasn't in there. She went up to investigate and saw the chupacabra scuttling out of her son's open window. She would later say that the creature had long, hairy arms and large, almond-shaped eyes that glowed red. "Hey, that sounds like my ex-wife." She would also mention that the beast left some rancid flesh on the windowsill and mangled her son's teddy bear, leaving some odd slime. The press would state that what the police found was consistent with her story. As for why the slime wasn't taken in for some DNA tests, she cleaned it up. What the duck? Anyhow, the morning after her sighting, another sighting would happen all the way in San Germain, where two men had claimed to have interrupted the creature as it was attempting to break into a pen containing fighting roosters. By this time, the government had enough and dispatched a team of veterinarians to examine over 300 suspected chupacabra victims, with a guy named Hector Garcia, who had examined 10 supposed victims of the chupacabra, stating that the puncture wounds were consistent with aggressive dogs. Which he also notes is why the goats were never consumed, even stating that some of the victims that survived had similar marks on them, meaning the attacker or attackers were, on occasion, successfully repelled. However, a guy named Angel Santana, who was with the Gardenville Veterinary Clinic, wasn't so sure about that, even theorizing that it could have been some religious cultist smucks or a different animal entirely. Angel Santana thought it was strange, mainly the circumstances of the killings and not the way the animals were killed, even mentioning that out of several reports that involved dead livestock, none of the people who made the report saw the attacker killing the livestock, meaning the attacks were extremely quick or something entirely different was at play, even pointing out a massive flaw in the dog argument. Though both Santana and the government agreed that there wasn't much evidence to support the chupacabra, the killing still persisted. Even more violations would occur on the night of December 26, 1995, where 8 more goats would be killed, all having the same 3 puncture wounds, and a lady reported how she found her 2 guinea hens with their necks ripped open, a chicken with multiple perforations, smaller holes stabbed into it. 4 ducks who, despite being killed at the neck, remained in their cages, 4 rabbits who were also dispatched and remained in their cages, her dog, who was left out, was unharmed yet terrified beyond belief, either unwilling or unable to fight the creature who had done this. She even found her cat, who had been killed with a single hole in the head and had his genitals removed. She noted how the cat was noble and cunning and would have been killed by a normal animal. Later on in Canavanas, a man was investigating his 2 dead goats when he saw a skinny creature leap out of a tree and run off. He said it was perched like a bird yet ran like a gazelle. In March of 1996, a guy saw a 4-foot-tall creature walking bipedally. He noted that the creature had large fangs, large eyes, and long arms with large claws. He also stated that its arms protruded from its shoulders. However, by the time the chupacabra interest trailed off near the end of 1996, a video recorded by Mundo OVNI showed the aftermath of a supposed chupacabra attack on some chickens in the Suburicillo sector of Lares, Puerto Rico, showing that the chupacabra may still be lurking about in the shadows and forests of Puerto Rico. So, I would like to report on what I saw and heard tonight. First of all, I doubt myself that I really saw a crawler, but I cannot explain otherwise. Earlier, around 11 p.m., I'm in Europe, it's night here, I wanted to go home after a bit of partying. The problem is, I live in the ass of the world, really far away from other houses. There are 2 ways to get to my house, one that takes about 50 minutes and one that only takes 20 minutes, but the shorter way goes through the forest. And the forest is right next to a cemetery, not exactly the nicest place to walk through at night. So, I decided to take the shorter way after the party. The path is lit in a few places. One of these places is a very old park bench, very close to the beginning of the path. When I was a few steps into the forest, I saw that someone was sitting on the park bench, someone really tall. Because I had a very bad feeling, I did not go through that way and went back to the street. When I turned around to take a last look at the person, my heart stopped for a moment. This person I saw was, in my opinion, not a human being. It was very pale, and the body was very disproportionate. Out of fear, I began to run faster, and when I was finally out of the forest, my head went crazy. But I still could not believe it. After I was about 100 meters, 330 feet, I think, away from the forest, I heard a whistle. It was not a normal whistle, it sounded like someone or something wanted me to go to it. That's the whole story. I know it might be a little bit boring, but that was the first experience of my life. I really hope I'm just scaring myself because I'm paranoid and it's not really a crawler. I should mention that I had never heard of skinwalkers before getting stationed in Colorado. When I did, I didn't know what to make of them and used to talk about them as a joke with my friends. The first experience I had was when I took one of my buddies up to the San Isabel National Forest, which I've been through many times before. We drove out there around 9 p.m. and rode some trails out to the heart of the forest looking for skinwalkers, but really I was just screwing with him and going for a trail ride. At the turnaround point, I got the cliché feeling of being watched but was driving with my backup camera on the whole time. The trail was a bit dusty, but I started to notice an almost man-like shape running behind the vehicle from a distance. I didn't say anything at first because I thought maybe it was just me, so I stopped for a minute and asked my friend if he saw anything in the camera, and he described the same thing. We then rolled down the windows and listened for any movement outside. With nobody else in the 250 square mile forest, we simultaneously heard a little boy, maybe 5 or 6 years old, cry out help, and our heads snapped towards each other, and he said effing drive. We keep moving back on the trail and seeing the thing in my camera, standing as tall as the spare 35-inch tire on my lifted Jeep while running on all fours. When we got to a fork in the trail that turned back the way we came, I decided to turn and head back because I was curious and wanted a definitive interaction. My buddy wasn't interested in proving there was bad shit in these woods, but I was driving. After a few minutes, he starts groaning loudly, like he was hurt, and covering his face. When I ask him what's wrong, I get hit with a sensation of absolute dread and sensory overload. When I was younger, I practiced black magic, and I can say with absolute certainty that it felt like a demonic presence. My eyes were tearing uncontrollably, and I could hardly breathe or speak. At which point I turned around on that trail, and we left for good, still with a clear humanoid shape tailing us out of the woods. He later told me he heard something make a noise out his window that started like a low gurgling but raised to a loud scream, just like a howler monkey. I never heard anything, but the sensation was overbearing and physically crippling. After getting back on the road and stopping for gas, we found muddy hand prints on the rock guards and tire gate of my Jeep. It was spotless before leaving. Second encounter. A few weeks later, I took some more friends out there, minus the one from the first trip, on what you could call an armed expedition. I was definitely disappointed in their tactical proficiency and weapon handling considering we were all soldiers, but were they willing to do this with me? There were 5 of us this time, and we were armed with 2 rifles, a 12 grams, and sidearms. After driving down the same trail and having a few odd experiences, such as hearing movement in the dark, glowing red eyes, and some singing, we decided to dismount and walk a footpath. This is around October and early for snow, but of course, as we get out of the vehicle, it starts snowing, almost a whiteout. Maybe 50 meters down the trail, we hear the movement of something really big on our right side in the trees, and to me, it sounds like it could only be a moose. One of the guys found a stick teepee off the trail, and we checked it out for a bit. There were some weird bundles of sticks tied to the tree branches, but we kept moving. The one guy in our group who wasn't convinced and thought these creatures were BS tried to be Mr. Hardass and walked ahead of the group with just my 12 grams and no flashlight. When I hear that movement in the woods again, I call everyone into a circle in case we get charged by a bull moose. He starts yelling, "WTF is that? Give me some light," and we shine a handheld spotlight in the direction he's holding his shotgun. He tells us to go back and hurry, never lowering his weapon. I pretty much had to herd him back, watching all directions and, a few times, situating ourselves for a confrontation as we heard noises and more movement of something tearing through the trees circling us from multiple directions. When we made it out of the woods and began mounting back up in the Jeep, he told me that he saw this big, pale, skinny creature just sitting there ahead of us on the trail. He said it had some thin, scraggly hair on its head, and he thought it was a log until it turned its head and looked at him in the light. We heard a few faint screams from the woods before departing. After these 2, I took a few more trips out there in similar armed groups, but aside from similar noises and others like the sound of chains jingling and some responses to our whistling, there were no other interactions. When I would whistle, the woods nearby would whistle back. I want to continue studying these creatures, though I'm back in Florida now. If anyone has any insight or experience, please feel free to share. This all took place in central New Jersey, and I'll start off by giving some backstory. When me and my brother were young, we were fascinated by the idea of monsters, creatures, and strange happenings, but aliens were by far our favorite thing to talk about. We'd watch videos of alleged UFO sightings together, we would go outside the backyard and search for UFOs, and we even played an alien invasion game where we would roleplay as aliens and survivors and battle each other. I guess we both just hoped that we would find aliens someday. Little did we know that one day we would, except it would not be the happy moment we always thought it would. It began during the summer. My brother and I would always have our eyes aimed at the sky, looking for strange objects and occurrences. I remember the first time I saw a UFO. I was in the house at the time when I heard my brother yelling for me to come outside. I quickly ran to him, and he told me there was a UFO in the sky and pointed at it. I looked up and saw it, but I told him it was just one of those reflective balloons, which we see pretty often from time to time. But he said no, it was not, and then told me to look through the telescope. So I did. It was already pointed at the object, and when I peered through the lens, I saw something that shocked me. There was a perfect sphere hovering in the air, surrounded by another object that was shaped like the letter U and rotated with the sphere inside it. The two parts were not connected to each other, but they moved as one. It looked to be made out of a very reflective metal like aluminum or chromium. It moved and stopped as it pleased, slowly making its way out of our sight. After that, the strangeness continued, and it was more than just UFOs that we began seeing throughout the summer. I could talk all day about all the strange things I saw, but I came here to tell the most significant of all these strange events that ended my summer of weirdness. I was in the living room playing video games on my Xbox 360. One floor below me, my brother was hanging out with my dad and sisters in the basement. It was dark outside, and it was getting late, so my brother decided to go upstairs to get some sleep. Rather than taking the indoor staircase, he decided to open the door to the backyard and ascend through the staircase outside. I am upstairs and have no idea that any of this is happening when, all of a sudden, I hear a scream that shatters the calm atmosphere. It was my brother. He sounded afraid, and I could hear him running quickly up the stairs and bolting in through the back door without closing the door. He then runs to me, jumping onto the couch and tugging on my shirt sleeve as if he wanted my protection. I could tell he was terrified, and so was I. I had no idea what was going on, but I felt as if some burglar or deranged man was going to come through the door any second now and harm us. I was frozen in fear, but after a while of nothing coming through the door, my parents and siblings began to arrive and see what was going on. Everyone was talking, and everyone was confused about what had happened. When my brother was asked about what he saw, he said, "It was like a little person or an alien. I don't know." We all went outside and searched the yard for the thing that my brother saw, but we found nothing. My brother did not want to talk much about it. So when everyone settled down, I came to talk to my brother alone. I knew he would be more comfortable speaking with me, and he knew that I was the only one who would believe him. Then he began to tell me what had happened. He told me that when he was about to go up the stairs, he heard a noise from behind him. It was just a soda can, rolling because the wind had blown over it, but then something to the right caught his attention. When he turned to look, he saw something that was crouching underneath a chair. It was small, probably 3 to 2 feet tall, and it raised its hand to my brother, like when you reach your hand out to try and calm someone down, but despite this potentially friendly gesture, it was built like a predator. It had claws on its feet and hands, it stood on 2 legs, my brother said it was like the color of a frozen, Turkish, muscular body, and it had no facial features besides the cross-shaped indent on its face, which I now realize could have been its mouth. After seeing it, my brother turned around and bolted up the stairs, screaming. To the left, he said he could see the creature was running away as well. After he told me that, I was shocked. I couldn't believe it. I thought that maybe he could have been startled by a raccoon, but his reaction was too real. He screamed and held on to me like he feared for his life. And my brother was not the type to get scared easily. He was a lot braver than me at the time, so I ran out of rational explanations as to what he could have seen and accepted the possibility that he could have seen some sort of alien creature or cryptid. When we woke up in the morning, we checked the yard again, and we found footprints. They were similar in shape to humans but different, and even when compared to my youngest sister's foot, it was still smaller, meaning it could not have been any of ours. Sadly, I didn't think to take a picture of it, and as for the strange events, they all just kind of stopped after that. We didn't see one strange thing for about 2 years after that incident. Sometimes I feel that the creature he saw was the one flying those strange aircraft we saw, and maybe it was looking back at us as well. Maybe it thought that we were calm and enlightened enough to interact with it, which we clearly were not. And after realizing that, it probably thought that we weren't worth the time and stopped visiting us. But as of recently, I'm starting to see more UFOs and strange sounds in the sky again, so who knows? Maybe this is its second attempt at contact, and if it is, I wonder if we'll be ready this time around.